Shalom, everybody. Welcome back to our series where these next couple of weeks, actually, we're going to be beginning a portion in our learning where we're going to be practicing our Hebrew transliteration. So, this week in particular, we're going to start with transliterating Hebrew names. So, um, if you're familiar with the five books of Moses or the Torah, these are all names taken from the Torah. And even if you're not familiar with the five books of Moses, they're still very popular names. So again, this portion of our series, you should be seeing it as a culmination of everything that we've studied so far. Okay, we went over the Hebrew alphabet, we've gone over the Hebrew vowels, and we've even gone over the grammatical rules. So if you're a complete beginner, of course, I invite you to follow along with your pencil and your paper, going at your own pace. And for the many of you who are much more advanced than I am, just tag along for the journey. So by now you should be familiar with the Hebrew alphabet and the Hebrew vowels, so I don't see the necessity in having to narrate as I'm transliterating letter and vowel by letter and vowel. So what we're going to do is if you're following me with your pencil and your notebooks, I'm going to write my own transliteration, you're going to write your own. Now would be the time to pause, and then once you're done writing your transliterations, you'll see how I do it to compare. Now, a note, not all transliterations are the same, so you don't have to worry about that. If we're one letter off, but we're still making the exact same sound, that's the important thing. That's what counts. So, let's continue. Let's start. Adam. Adam. That's our first name. Why didn't I transliterate the Aleph? Well, in our sheets, and as we've seen, I choose to transliterate the Aleph as an apostrophe only when it's in the middle of a word. Because when it's in the middle of a word, then it indicates a sort of pause or a sort of break in a syllable. But when it's at the beginning of a word or at the end of a word, I really don't see the need to add an apostrophe. I just go for the vowel. So continuing with the second name. When I write in English, I use a CH for the letter chet. When I write in Spanish, I use the letter J. That is the more popular option in Spanish writings. Furthermore, as you see on the screen, this Vav actually looks like a shuruk, like an U vowel, because it's a Vav with a dot in the middle. But my friends, this is not a shuruk, and what tells me that it's not a shuruk? Well, the very fact that it has a vowel under it. So, um, a a vowel, sorry, a consonant that's being used as a vowel cannot have a vowel under it. You might think, well, wouldn't it be a type of combination of vowels? Well, no, not really. We saw how that worked with the diphthongs last week. This is not that. Furthermore, you also might be saying, well, if it's a vav, a consonant that has a dagesh in it, isn't it doubled? Well, I'd say try to focus more on, try to lean towards the traditional ways of transliterating it, um, because just because it has a dagesh in the letter, it's not always doubled. Okay. For example, if I were to double this vav, then it would be a VV, and that might look like just a W. Okay. And I haven't made the note yet, but according to scholars, um, the vav used to be pronounced as a W, but now it's pretty much 100%. Everybody just pronounces it as a v, as a bilabial sound. So that's why we're sticking with that modern, traditional sense of the letter, and we're sticking to the singular V. So we have Adam and we have Chava. Adam and Chava, which in English are known as Adam and Eve. All right, here are the next two names. Cain. Cain. And as I mentioned, people have their own way of transliterating things. So this is an example. For the letter Kof, maybe somebody used the letter Q, and that's fine. as long as we're both saying kain. Next is hevel. Hevel. So if you followed along nicely with the Hebrew alphabet and the Hebrew vowels, this should be pretty much a breeze for you. You've noticed already the pattern that we're doing consonant, then vowel, then back to the consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. So these names are traditionally, they're translated in English as Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel. Next, we're going to go a little further into Genesis, only to chapter 6. We're going to start with the first name. Noach. Noach. Again, in English, I transliterate the chet as a ch. In Spanish, I would put a j. Now, here we have an example of the patach genuva, the stolen patach. And this was one of our examples last week as well. When the patach is under a chet at the end of a word, the vowel is placed before the consonant. It's pronounced before the consonant. So it's not nocha, nocha, it's noach, noach. Next. Shem, Shem. One little note, as I mentioned 2 weeks ago with the vowels, or 3 weeks ago with the vowels, the tsere as a long S sound in Ashkenazi pronunciation is an A. So yes, you will be hearing Ashkenazi Jews pronounce this as shame, shame. But for this class and this series, I want to stick to the Sephardic, which is just an S sound. Next. Cham. Last time I'm going to say in English, to transliterate chet, I would use a ch. In Spanish, a j. Yafet. Yafet. So here we have Noah and his 3 sons. All right, now we're going to go over to Genesis chapters 12 to the end of Genesis, starting with Avraham. Avraham. This is actually the first of several examples you're going to see where the letter vet gets transliterated into English as a B, which is how we have the name Abraham. In Hebrew, Avraham. So pretty much every transliteration I've seen of this name does not have that apostrophe. That is just my own addition, but you don't even have to do it. It's just Yitzchak. Yitzchak. This is actually one of the hardest names for me. When I was first learning these, I was like, I could never get just the tzadi and the chet sound back to back. It was so weird for me. Yitzchak. Yitzchak. And then we have so I make a point to every time I pronounce this word, I overemphasize the ayin. Okay, so I say Yaakov, Yaakov, Yaakov. So in talking about the patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. But I remember when Professor Garber was explaining as well, he said, you're not going to find anybody that says Yaakov, Yaakov. Okay, it's just Yaakov, Yaakov. That ayin is pretty much just ignored entirely, and the patach and the patach, the chat of patach, they're just conflated into one syllable, Yaakov, Yaakov. But staying faithful to the way that it's written, it'd be Yaakov, Yaakov, with a little pause in between. But again, as Professor Garber stated, everybody says Yaakov. Continuing with the matriarchs. So, this first one, Sarah, Sarah. And if you recall, this is the name change. Her first name was Sarai, which was basically the Shin, the Resh, and the Yud. That is a cursive Shin. I'm sorry if I scared anyone. It's pretty bad looking too. Let's just say it's a Shin, Resh, and Yod. So this actually served as a diphthong. It's not, in Spanish, it's Sarai as two separate syllables. In Hebrew, it's just Sarai, Sarai. And her name was changed to Sarah, Sarah. Next. Rivka, Rivka. Here too, as you're seeing, I'm getting more used to not putting an apostrophe, not because it works with or without, basically. Rivka, Rivka. Next. This is Rachel, Rachel. And I've tried my best to be respectful whenever I would hear somebody, as they're trying to read Hebrew transliterations, they mistake this as Rachel, Rachel, and I have to just respectfully listen, but I hope by now we all know the ch sound is not in biblical Hebrew. It would be Rachel, okay? Get used to that the chet sound. Rachel. And finally, Leah. Leah. So here, because the aleph is in the middle of the word, okay, an apostrophe will work. Leah. 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 And I'm sure you're familiar with the pronunciation Leah. Lay, as it's Syrian, it's Ashkenazi pronunciation. So now we're going to continue with the 12 tribes of Israel. If you don't know them in order, now's your time to learn them in order. I've broken them up into sets of 3. Each group has 4. So let's begin with the firstborn. Okay, this is difficult. This is a V and this is a U, just so you know. Reuven. Reuven. Okay. As you can see, I've distinguished between the Shvana, the aleph. I put both in E to symbolize that brief Shva, and the apostrophe for both the Shva and the aleph. So, Reuven. Reuven. Next. Shimon. Shimon. Of course, you could just say Shimon, 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 but out of respect for the ayin, I choose to say Shimon, Shimon. Next. This is actually one of the most difficult for me because growing up in a Pentecostal church, who isn't used to saying Levi? Levi. It's Levi. Levi. And in Ashkenazi pronunciation, I'm sure you've heard that Sari as Levi. Levi. Finally, in this group, we have okay, you and I both know that is a Shvana, which is a brief audible Shva. but it's not treated as its own syllable, so it's not Yehuda, Yehuda. It's Yehuda, Yehuda. These four names are translated in English as Reuben, Simon, Levi, and Judah. In this next group, we have but doesn't that dalet have a dagesh in it? Wouldn't we double the letter? I don't see the point in doubling letters when they're at the beginning. Okay, I'm not gonna go the dan. Okay, it's just done. And also, as we learned a few weeks ago with the Beged Kefet letters, this probably had a different pronunciation many years ago. Now we just say done. Naftali, Naftali. So as you see this fe here, it's okay if you use a ph as we would in English for the f sound. I choose to go with the f. Again, I'm not going to say gugad, gugad. No point in putting double. Pretty much ignoring the hard gimel, which might have had a different pronunciation. And finally, asher, asher. Again, aleph is at the beginning of a word. No need for an apostrophe. Just start with the vowel. So for this last group, this first name is actually extremely interesting. Watch how I transliterate it. Okay, you might be wondering why did I put both scenes. In this case, they're not a sheen, it's a scene. Why did I put both scenes like that? Technically, I only transliterated one scene. As you see, this scene has a dagesh, so I can double that one, which means I pretty much ignored this scene altogether. Well, wouldn't it be yiseshar? Yiseshar? Well, there is the etymological answer, if that's the correct word, and then there's the traditional answer. So regarding the etymology of this name, it said that it's derived from the two words to have a reward, if I'm not mistaken, but the traditional interpretation, well, I guess it's the same thing. It's interpreted as saying that this name of the sun is seen as a reward. There's more to it regarding the story of Leah. I'm pretty sure it's Genesis chapter. Is it 30? Chapter 30, or it might be a little after that. It's around the same part of the Torah where it talks about the Dudaim, the flowers, that whole episode with Reuben. But yeah, basically the rabbis say you're not to pronounce that second sheen, just ignore it. But it is still there in the name Yisachar, Yisachar. So when I was learning to memorize these, how to write them, especially in cursive, I always have to remember, oh, hey, this one has a second scene, just cuz. So, continuing. Zevulun, Zevulun. Yosef, Yosef. Binyamin, Binyamin. I'm sure you're seeing by now that the letter Yod is very much so transliterated into English as a letter J. So Yosef goes from Yosef to Joseph, and Binyamin goes to Benjamin. Benjamin. All right, let's continue on to the book of Exodus with these four names, beginning with Moshe. Moshe. Now, for these final heys at the end of a word, some people choose to not transliterate them at all, especially in Spanish, where a final H is already a letter that is silent in Spanish, so they see no need to even add it at the end of a word. Whereas in English, while the hey does have that sound, it's not really emphasized at the end of a word like this unless it has a Mapic, unless it's a Mapic hey. But even so, I include the final H just to try to be faithful to that transliteration of Moshe. Moshe. Next. Aharon. Aharon. Miriam. Miriam. And here we actually then, the name is transliterated as Mary later on. So if you recall figures like the mother of Jesus, her Hebrew name would have been Miriam. Miriam. Finally, here we have Paro. Paro. So we have Moses, Aaron, Miriam, and the Pharaoh. Pharaoh. In Hebrew, it's Paro. So we're just going to conclude with these names right here, which are taken off from the later part of the Torah, beginning with this. Yehoshua, Yehoshua. Now, I used to make the mistake of saying Yehoshua, Yehoshua, pronouncing the glottal stop of the ayin before the vowel, but as we learned, this is a stolen patach, meaning the vowel sound is before the consonant. So now it is Yehoshua, Yehoshua, the ayin at the very end, but everybody pronounces it just Yehoshua, Yehoshua. So in this name alone, actually, we have first off, we know it means God is salvation. God is my salvation. We have the Yud and the Hey, which is half of the Tetragrammaton. Actually, it even continues into three. So this name contains three out of the four letters in God's name. Okay, and then we know these letters like Shin, Vav, and Shin, Vav, Ayin to be the root of the word for salvation. But I just want to mention the shorter version, of course, is just Yud, Shin, Vav, Ayin, Yeshua, as has been transliterated as Jesus. But then also in this name, we have the name with different vowels. Hosea, the prophet Osea. So I'm not familiar with his name in English. In Spanish, it's Oseas, the prophet Hosea. So very special name. This is definitely one definitely one taking note of. Yehoshua, translated into English as Joshua. Then we have Kalev, 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 translated as Caleb, Caleb. And then finally, the last name I want to go into is and finally, I'd say Again, in English I use the letters CH. In Spanish I would use the letter J to transliterate the letter Chet. This is Pinchas, Pinchas, which is interesting because I'm not sure how we get the English translation Phineas out of Pinchas, but in English, Phineas. So with this, we've reviewed a good number of Hebrew names, and by now you should get the feel of what it's like to be transliterating each word, letter, vowel, letter, vowel. It's very repetitive, I'd say. The goal is indeed to read Hebrew without the need of transliteration, but I still tell people that transliterating and learning to transliterate quickly, it's a helpful practice that's one day it'll allow you to make it easier for other people. Okay, not just other beginners, but other people who don't know anything about Hebrew and they still want to be able to pronounce a word. Well, that's where you come in, helping them with transliterating it for them. So even if you're not going to need it, maybe one day you can help somebody who will. We're going to continue next week with a lesson on the names of the books in the Hebrew Bible. Might be a longer lesson. We're going to focus on the books of the Hebrew Bible. There's 24 of them. We'll go into the numbering as well, and also the meaning of each name of the Hebrew Bible. So yeah, it sounds like a longer lesson for sure, but hopefully we're all there to see it. Shavua Tov. Have a great week, everybody. If you're watching this on Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. If you're watching this any other day, Shavua Tov.